The only place Florence and Jennifer see their children now is in photos. 5 years ago, they sent them to stay with their sister Mariam. But when they returned to collect them, their children had disappeared. Mariam claimed she'd put them in a boarding school, but in fact the children had been taken to America, legally adopted without their mother's knowledge. What do you think about the fact that a family can come from another country and become the legal parents of somebody else's children? Mariam said she'd been approached by an agent who promised the children a free education. But that promise turned out to be a conduit for international adoption, and by the time the sisters even suspected something was wrong, their children were no longer theirs. If you had a chance to speak to the family that your children are now living with, what would you say to them? Florence and Jennifer are among countless families in Uganda whose children have been lost to international adoption. This industry isn't being driven by a supply of orphans in need of homes. It's being driven by demand from America.
Barbara, we need more children, we need children, we have families waiting here, we need children, we need children.
This woman worked for an American adoption agency. It was her job to find children to be adopted.
I used to tell them these children are not in a market. They are not for sale.
Fault Lines teamed up with the Investigative Fund to explore the market in Uganda's children, asking how this could happen, who's responsible, and if there's any hope these mothers will see their children again.
Ukuno bedo kune tie ginga amia aripo bedo ni aripo keto men munyame to beneno aka neno na mi to nyang ni nga mani tie gigo makada ichomo go yuye kor be nyalo ngeni me mama kosa kometwa mena ag manyalo ketie men.
Tabitha lives in a remote village about 5 hours by car from Uganda's capital, Kampala. 6 years ago, her son Michael was adopted by an American family. He'd been ill and she couldn't afford his treatment. So when some people came to her community saying they wanted to help needy children, she thought her son was lucky to be chosen.
Wazungu majubino munju woto kisi kamulu bedo pa center. Joani jojo konyo nyithindo maju shandere. Kod mabaju nguye ko sameni jo.
Ni yeyo nango. Nijukura nyati, nijutera nyati swa. So she said.
What happened to Tabitha is incredibly complicated. With the help of an interpreter, I tried to get the full story. But even now, 6 years later, she seems confused about what she agreed to.
Juwachanede.
Ayere gi joni, joki do kuro nyati, ndo nyati kisama pa jo ora pari gaboro, nyati do ki Uganda ka, kiska orangweno ka do jujuri pukelo nyata ati munedi, jukelo nyati rian, peshuma kande.
Okay. So she said that they committed that.
In fact, court records show Tabitha consented to the adoption of Michael. So legally speaking, she's no longer his mother.
Laura and Philip Hunker are adoptive parents to Michael and Henry.
Now he lives in Portland, Oregon with this family, Philip and Laura Hunker. This is a local news report filmed last year with Michael and another boy they adopted from China. 3 years after they took Michael to America, Tabitha gave birth to another boy, Solomon.
It's pizza night in the Hunker home, but something is missing.
When they heard that Tabitha had had another baby and was again in need of help, the Hunkers sent money for Solomon's care. They wanted to adopt him too, and sent an agent to talk to Tabitha.
Awashuni hanga oroko. Nyati akidomio gujo. Usebi. Tashire goni nyati parai doang maunati munedi amdokura.
Eventually, the Hunkers came to Uganda, and Tabitha says she was called to a meeting in Kampala. She said she felt ill while she was there and had a dizzy spell. It was then, she says, that a woman at the meeting took Solomon from her and gave him to Laura Hunker. We asked the Hunkers to confirm what happened at that meeting, but they didn't respond to the question. However, they did insist that Tabitha has repeatedly agreed to the adoption and that she signed documents to that effect. Despite this, Tabitha told us that she had never wanted to give her son away.
Ati dakushamu kwa nyati shingani tumio muzungu. Nyumanyi gocho kutingu nyati tumio muzungu chikwanyani kenyo. Mwenye cho kwanyani kenyo ma anakwa.
She could see the Muzungu holding her child. And then she asked, what about my child? How do I get my child? Then they told her the Muzungu would bring the child to her. That's the day he was taken from her.
Tabitha says she was still breastfeeding when Solomon was taken away from her. She told us she felt so distraught the next morning she wanted to take her own life. That was more than 2 years ago and the last time Tabitha had her son. To find out more, I went to the family court in Kampala. They keep a chaotic archive containing thousands of files, one for every child adopted, including Solomon. In his, I found information about Tabitha and the Hunker family, as well as their American adoption agency, Journeys of the Heart. The court records show there were 4 hearings before Solomon's adoption was approved. At the first 2, the judge adjourned, saying Tabitha didn't understand what adoption was or want it for Solomon. But at the 3rd hearing, the records say Tabitha returned to court and agreed to the adoption. At the 4th hearing, the judge granted the adoption application, and Solomon became the Hunkers' legal child. Was it ever your intention to sign away permanent guardianship of Solomon to a different family?
Yeah.
But an American family can't take a Ugandan child back home with them without a visa to the US. And 18 months later, Solomon still hadn't been approved.
The family says this case...
Unable to bring him home with them, the Hunkers became frustrated.
Say hi, Mommy.
This is video taken by the orphanage last November.
This has been excruciating on our family.
The Hunkers say the Ugandan High Court approved the adoption more than a year ago. But when they went to the U.S. Embassy to get Solomon's visa approved, they were stonewalled.
They have not given us any reasons why that application has not been accepted.
What do you think the holdup is? We'd like to know the answer to that as well, honestly.
The US Embassy refused to comment, but again, Solomon's court file was useful. When we talked, Tabitha told me she'd been called to a meeting at the American Embassy in Kampala. The embassy staff had asked her if she'd wanted Solomon to be adopted. Her claim that she told the officials she was against the adoption is given some credence by a document in the file. It's a letter written by the US Embassy to the Ugandan court describing Solomon's adoption as problematic.
We need help. We need the United States government to approve his application.
Despite Tabitha's insistence that she didn't want her child to be adopted, Solomon wasn't returned to her. She told us she hadn't even been allowed to see him. Where is Solomon now?
Solomon pamantekuni.
After a lot of searching, I found a social worker who knew. Stella Ogwan's in charge of child welfare in Uganda. When she heard about Tabitha's story, she moved Solomon from the childminder being paid by the Hunkers to a government baby's home.
The reason I took that action as the officer responsible for children was because I received a complaint from the mother, and she was insisting that she didn't want the child to go. Then I said the best would be for me to move in and see where the child is placed.
How much more information do you need? I mean, it's been over a year since Tabitha lost custody of Solomon.
It's more than a year.
How many times do you ask a person to say no before you abort the process?
I cannot say how many times. You know, counseling is a process, and it's gradual.
Stella was also behind a change to Ugandan law, which means that foreign families wanting to adopt now have to foster a child in Uganda for at least 1 year first. That law took effect in 2016, the year before Solomon was adopted.
We wanted to prevent a situation where people just fly in today and get legal guardianship and go with the children the next 2 weeks. That's what we wanted to avoid.
Do you think the family in America, who are legally the parents of Solomon, have any idea of the turbulence here in Uganda?
Yes, they are aware. They are aware because from the day I got Solomon from Buwenge with that family, they got to know. They even sent me a message. They called me. I told them I wouldn't discuss with them the issue on phone, but we can exchange mails, and they didn't do that. But they've been communicating through their lawyers.
But how could the Hunkers have met the legal obligation to foster Solomon when they hadn't spent the required year in Uganda? The judge in the case, Moses Muchibi, decided that since the Hunkers had been paying someone to look after Solomon, they had in effect constructively fostered him.
The person you are calling is not answering.
I wanted to ask Judge Muchibi why he'd come to this conclusion, but he declined to be interviewed. I also wanted to know more about the American agency behind Solomon and Michael's adoptions. I tracked down a former agent of theirs, Barbara Andabalakera. She told me she'd spent 3 years working for Journeys of the Heart. She was arrested in 2014, soon after they'd parted ways. We met at an undisclosed location. So what was the involvement of Journeys of the Heart?
They were to provide the financial support, and then I would provide the service.
And what was the service?
The service was to find children that can be adopted. They wanted everything fast. Because if you get a child today, spends in a home like 2 months, 3 months, is adopted, that means they are spending less on this child. But if a child comes, stays for a year, it's much expense.
And they would say that to you? They would say,
we need children that can be adopted fast.
It doesn't sound like they were very concerned about the children.
No.
It sounds like they were concerned about the business.
Business.
You say you felt a lot of pressure. Did you worry that there would be consequences if you didn't find the children?
Of course, they would threaten, we are closing. We are closing. If you're not bringing in more children, we are closing.
So they would basically threaten to fire you?
Yes.
If you didn't provide as many children as they wanted? There were allegations that Barbara had been trafficking children, amongst other things. Eventually, the police charged her with child neglect, but she disappeared for a time, and now police say her file's missing. She denies all of the charges. But Barbara was just a local agent for Journeys of the Heart. To find out more, I needed to talk to the agency's director in the US, David Slansky. After a lot of attempts to get hold of David Slansky by email and on the phone, I've finally come to Portland to see if I can find him in person. I think this might be his home address, so this all feels actually a bit weird.
Hello?
Good morning, David Slansky.
Yes.
I wanted to talk to you about some families in Uganda who say their children were adopted against their wishes.
I'd rather not.
Do you want to tell me about Kasiri Solomon, who's currently living in a government institution because his mother in Uganda doesn't want him to be adopted?
Well, apparently she's given conflicting stories. I think you should talk to the family who wants to adopt her.
I've been trying to. For some reason, they don't seem to want to speak to me.
And my understanding is that on many occasions she has consented.
How many times does a mother need to object to an adoption before
How many
you stop
times
the
does she have to-
process?
Well, it wasn't for me to stop the process. The family wanted to continue.
So you were just there to facilitate the American family?
Pretty much. The family needed an agency in the U.S. to be there for them, with whether they were proactive or not. We'd helped them before we believed that the child was very medically needy. We believed that the mother was very desperate. We believed her story, at least as we understood it in the beginning.
Solomon's was initiated after that change to the law.
Some judges were saying that there were exceptions, like for medically exigent exceptions such as Solomon.
And to be clear, you don't have any regard for the change to the law? That's not a concern to you?
It's irrelevant. Well, we have not encouraged families or listened to their entreaties to adopt from Uganda since then.
Apart from the Hunkers?
Yeah, who again were adopting a sibling after being contacted by the birth mother.
Did you inform them about the change to the law?
Of course, they were very cognizant of that as well.
International adoption can be complicated, but this family says it has been like a living nightmare. Every day they're without their son. The Hunkers contacted Senators Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley.
They've told us that they're on our side. They think that that our story is viable.
Philip and Laura Hunker have been very public in their efforts to get Solomon to the US. So I was surprised when they told me by email they didn't want to be interviewed by fault lines. According to the records, Philip was in court when the judge ruled that Tabitha didn't understand the implication of an adoption. So I wanted to know why the family was still pursuing it. We tried to talk to Philip Hunker as he was getting into his car. I wanted to talk to you about Tabitha and her son Solomon.
But you already sent us an email. We sent you one back saying that we're not going to go on camera.
Tabitha says she doesn't want this adoption to happen. And the court records reflect that.
It depends on when you've talked to her. And it depends on which court records you're looking at.
Okay, I mean, I've seen 4 sets of court records from 4 hearings. Yeah, what's your understanding of what her wishes are?
I can't talk about this with you. My attorney, we forwarded all the information to the attorney. She told us not to speak with you. I'm not going to speak with you anymore.
And then, just before this film went to air, we did hear from the Hunkers. In an email, they insisted again that Tabitha has repeatedly agreed to this adoption. They sent us photos of Tabitha signing documents to that effect. We don't know if the Hunkers will succeed in bringing Solomon to America, but we do know his case isn't isolated. More than 1,600 Ugandan children have been adopted to America since 1999. But it's hard to know how many of them were actually orphans, and how many may have had parents who still wanted them. For the past 12 years, the Council on Accreditation has been regulating American adoption agencies. I wanted to know if Journeys of the Heart had been investigated over any of the issues raised in this film. So I talked to the CEO, Richard Klarberg.
I can't answer that question. The answer is I don't know.
Is that not the type of thing that ought to have come up when it came to reaccrediting Journeys of the Heart?
It would have if we had had access to that information, yes.
And how would you get access to that
We would
information?
have had access, most likely, from United States government, a post in Uganda, whether it's a State Department or Homeland Security there, immigration.
And in the case of Journeys of the Heart, you didn't get that information?
I just don't want to comment about any specific agency.
I asked him why his organization doesn't put more emphasis on investigating wrongdoing overseas.
Going about identifying whether that has happened is not something that we are trained to do, that we have the resources to do, or actually that we have in any way the capacity to do.
Why, if it's difficult to trust some of the institutions in countries like Uganda, which I think is a fairly well-accepted fact, why then would the Department of State continue to allow inter-country adoption?
I think you'd have to ask the United States Department of State. I have asked myself that question again and again. And it is, it's a puzzle to me. It depends.
The State Department refused to be interviewed for this story, but in an email they said they rely on their accreditors to monitor and oversee adoption agencies. It's been 5 years since Florence and Jennifer's children were taken to America. At best, the adoption was deeply flawed and the process may have been fraudulent. The mothers say they didn't even know it was happening. They've reported it as a crime to the police. But now that the children are in America, there's nothing anyone can do. Their children belong to a different family now. I traced that family to their hometown. And the father agreed to be interviewed anonymously because he said he hasn't told his children their biological families are looking for them.
The very first thing we did is contact our American attorney who finalized the adoption in the States with us to confirm if it's legally finalized, what we need to do to confirm that things aren't going to change for the children, and all that's done and finalized.
What does it feel like to know that there's some kind of dispute over your children?
So, devastated. We have children that go to bed every night in our home whose parents in Uganda wishing they were going to bed in their hut. There are parents in Uganda who only see our children, their children, whatever, electronically. So you take these well-intended concepts and turn them into a child trafficking case. Like, we set out to do what's right and ended up being child traffickers unintentionally, you know.
What would you say if another family from America told you they were considering adopting from Uganda?
I would say don't. That's the short answer. Don't. Because you're signing up for a lot more than you think you are when you fill out your agency application.
Once a child's legally in America, there's nothing anyone can do to get them back unless the adoptive family wants to return them. So it's possible that Florence and Jennifer will never see their children again. There might still be hope for Tabitha and Solomon. We asked the social worker we met in Kampala if we could at least bring her to see her son. He's now almost 3, and he's been separated from his mother for the majority of his life.
An kada kilwakere, kada kishiemo, iwash pa nyath paramine, akinyali yegi. Inyalo bino ka tinuangane, maka wiru, tipenjo ni iranga no takingo eginanga, anigi takinyalo rawiro. Akingo egine, anigi takinyatu wiru rang rupar.
Solomon didn't recognize his mother. He seemed scared when she approached him. She left him alone for a while to calm down. But it wasn't easier the second time.
Onye marash. Lupiri ko kwa an. Anango go wash. Lupiri mere damito neno go. Imeni spate. Woki ni sama ki the other day maka neno go. Mimi damito neno go bimeni spate.
Pata soda.
Ah, bye. Bye.
Kwata.
Bye bye.
She has to leave him behind. He isn't her child anymore. This legal tug of war has meant that Solomon has lived in an institution for much of his life.
Idira gene. Miyo chunyiri po winjo malit. Iri piye winjo to gi meki winjo swaswa. Diari gino kimilita.